question. In your need to be right, is it about your ego or is it really about trying to move us from point A to point B? I have a question. I want to talk about it, and we're going to do this conversation while talking about generative AI specifically. But first, you know what we need? We need the intro. All right, welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. Welcome back to the Daily Donna. I am your host, Dr. Donna Oriowo, sex and relationship therapist in Washington, D.C. metro area. Now, I know you're probably thinking, well, why is this sex and relationship therapist want to talk about generative AI and what we're seeing out here in these streets? Well, because it's still a relationship. It's our relationship to AI, it's our relationship to each other, and our relationship to ourselves. And that's what I really want to get into. But before we get into it, I want to address the elephant in the room. I'm not dressed. I decided that in doing this challenge where I am challenging myself to be here every day and to post every day, um, that I cannot allow anything to get between me and what I set out to do. And I recognize that for a moment, the thing that was about to stop me from recording this was clothing. And I'm just like, but I'm comfortable in this robe. And who's going to see this anyway? Just me and you, right? It's not like it's going to be a bunch of us. So I decided that we're just going to go ahead and do it because and this is also something I want you to think about. Reduce the things that you put as reasons between you and the thing. This is something that came up in therapy like 2 weeks back, right? With my therapist. We were talking about the things that I want to do. And then I put in a list of things I needed to do before I could do it. And she was just like, wow, you're able to use your intelligence to manufacture excuses to never start. I'm really good at saying, "Oh, I need to go learn this other thing. I got to go back to school for this. I got to whatever the thing is, I am really great at manufacturing excuses." And I need to get out of my own way, and I'm encouraging you to try and get out of your way too. When you find yourself manufacturing excuses to delay the time that you are wanting to start something, when you're finding that the gap is getting wider and wider, look at what you put between you and the thing and determine whether or not those are real reasons or they're reasons that you came up with, which I feel like is in many ways an accountability, responsibility conversation because you have to take responsibility for yourself, right? And you need to account for why you have created all these excuses, which I think brings us back here, right? Because I'm asking you to critically feel, right? To be into those feelings, to really and think critically about them. Like what is going on? These excuses, think critically about those excuses that you have made. Where did they come from? What purpose are they actually serving? And does it aid your goal or does it stop your goal? Like seriously, the French is trying to come forward and that is not what we're doing. Anyway, so I'm gonna think of today as like a critically thinking Thursday, and we're gonna critically think together. Now, I am not claiming to have the answers. This is, excuse me, this is a learning moment, I think, for us both because I'm not trying to be as prepared. I only have like a few notes in my on my iPad, like just a few points that I wanted to make sure that we cover. So on this critically thinking Thursday, I want to talk about AI use. Because here's what I'm seeing. What I am seeing is, especially like this past week, I opened Facebook and every two scrolls, it was some big, ugly caricature that somebody generated using AI, asking it to tell them with everything you know about me, do da 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 da, right? And I was bothered by it, right? Like I don't want to see that because it feels like a misuse of generative AI. Not only because it's stealing an art type and passing it off as something that it created when really it's the reworking of things that have been stolen. Um, but also because that, I mean, there's information going around, and I cannot attest to the trueness of this at this time, but hopefully later, and somebody could tell me in the comments. They're saying that like every time you use like a chat GPT, it uses like 16 ounces of water, and that water becomes completely unusable. Which I think fair when you can think, when you're thinking about the environmental impacts and you are seeing someone doing something that you are like, yo, this is having a horrible negative environmental impact. I understand the urge to call it out. And I get the feel sometimes that this is more or less about people's egos than it is about saving the planet. Come with me on this walk. Just let's we gonna walk in here. So part of the reason that I've been thinking is I think it might have a little bit something to do with social learning theory. So, social learning theory is about how we learn, right? It considers the environmental and the cognitive factors. Yes, I know I'm going here, right? And I want you to come with me on this very boring journey for just this moment, right? We're going to talk a little bit about the social learning theory. So, social learning theory has various steps. It's attention, retention, reproduction, and motivation. I'm looking at my notes. And in social learning theory, it is considering the environmental and cognitive factors that interact to influence learning and human behavior. So attention, retention, and all that jazz, right? Like, so it's the importance of observing. So your attention, because where your attention goes, something has to first grab your attention. You have to see the behavior and also the consequences to seeking replication. Like, what would it mean if you redid this thing? The retention is the behavior will be remembered. The learning is not immediate, but it happens over time, especially when it's reinforced. So if you see the same thing over and over and over again, right? This thing, not only did it get your attention the first time, you see it happening again and again out here in nature, right? And then we'll do like a reproduction. So we try to imitate and recreate this thing. We may also note our own limitations in the recreation of this thing, but we try to reproduce the thing because we see the positive outcomes that other people have received. Now, considering the last part, that motivation, the motivation will be the thing to let you know whether or not the next time you see it, it will again have your attention, it will retain that attention, and you will reproduce it because the motivation will be based on the rewards that you receive, right? So whether or not it felt good, okay, safe saying, whatever for you. So rewards and punishments will show up in the reinforcement, reinforcing how we sort of like move through the thing. So when we choose to reproduce what it is that we see. And I'm wondering if people are only talking mess about people who use generative AI because they've seen other people hold those folk up as being smart. Yeah, that's where we are. Um I'm asking because I'm thinking that there seems to be like there's a quick dopamine hit in being able to get an immediate result. So if you can immediately see that someone is doing something that they shouldn't, that you think that they shouldn't do, even if they have already done it, by telling them that they are wrong about the thing and telling them that they are wasteful about the thing and what it costs, I'm like, you get the immediate hit of being able to be on the right side of something, right? To be able to say, like, I know something and maybe you don't know this thing. So I taught you, dopamine hit. Um, I am berating you for doing this thing, dopamine hit. Other people are liking my comments and they are reconfirming the thing that I just said, dopamine hit. And I see a bunch of other people making similar posts about why you shouldn't be doing this thing, dopamine hit, right? Again, I don't want to say that we're saying stop, right? Because I agree, right? The use of generative AI for every little thing and a lot of dumb things feels it feels off and awful, especially when you recognize the impact that it has on the environment. And I want to point out that are all of the people who are saying something to the individual also saying something to and about the system? Because I think that we forget sometimes that individuals, more or less, in many ways, are players in a system, but they are not necessarily the system, or rather, they don't have the same amount of power within the system, right? So if everybody stopped using generative AI in their personal use, it doesn't stop that there are various companies that have mandated its use. And how are we dealing with that? It does not stop that various that our governments are still trying to force data centers upon us in order to support the use of generative AI, even if we're not at a critical point where we need all these data centers yet, right? And I think the biggest thing, it doesn't mean that we've put our energy in the right direction. I'm wondering what the feelings are that we're having about generative AI, because I think that some of it feels like there's some fear, right? There's a fear of people losing their critical thinking skills. There's a fear of people not being able to write a simple email on their own anymore. People are talking about like, you're going to kill us all because of convenience. And I'm just like, convenience is the name of the game for multiple things that have been innovations in one way or another, right? For the convenience of being able to travel with more with with more speed, the car, right? It's the want to go from this country to that country, the plane. Computers are about convenience. The internet is about convenience. There are a lot of things that are actually about convenience, and I don't know that we want to necessarily dig talk shit about the idea of seeking convenience as much as we want to talk about how the convenience harms the planet, because the thing that brings the convenience is not the problem. The problem is actually in the way that they have chosen to employ the convenience, because someone else is trying to get rich. And I think that it is harder for us to identify who the players are in getting rich off the generative AI and the data centers and wanting to data farm and all that. I think it's harder to identify them. It's harder to yoke your representatives up by the collar and tell them, hey, you stop, you're going to kill us, right? I think it's harder to see an immediate change with them. So we seek the immediate reward, not necessarily of change, but of patting people on the back for telling people that this thing, and patting ourselves on the back for telling people that the thing that they're doing is not the thing that they should be doing. And I think for me, it is the difference between what is an individual contribution to a problem and what is a systemic concern that caused a problem. Greed is the cause of the problem because somebody is trying to get rich through data mining, right? And we are blaming the individual for seeking some level of cheap thrill entertainment with the use of AI, or even trying to buy back their time back, while we also at the same time acknowledge that people are time impoverished. So we recognize time poverty as a problem, that people don't have free time in the same way, right? Because a lot of people have 2 and 3 jobs, plus they have kids, they have a place that they need to take care of, and they're supposed to be working on their mental health and their self-improvement, and like really trying to figure out how do we fit all of these things in a day. And we begrudge them for using the generative AI to find back the time that they lost. I am not saying it's wrong to say, hey, let's talk about this use of this thing that you're using. And I'm just like, but there's a bigger system at play. And I feel like sometimes it gets lost in these conversations that we direct at the individual. Because I think what we intend to do is change the system. And I get that we want to change the system through the people. It feels like you want to flood the field in a way, which I'm looking like, yeah. And I kind of want us to direct this energy toward the people who can figure out other ways to cool the system, right? Because the question is, do you want AI to go away, or do you want them to stop using our fresh drinking water to cool their systems? And I think that's where I end up having maybe my disconnect. And I think that's where I kind of want this conversation to be. Like, I really don't know how long this video is even going to last when I put it up, but I do want to make sure that I put it up. I want to have this conversation a bit because I'm like, I think we're both recognizing AI use as a problem to our environment, but I think that we also are having feelings about the use of AI in terms of what it does to people's brains, to how people interact with other people, to how AI is becoming the community that people are seeking, which to me speaks of a larger problem that we have in accessing community that is not behind a paywall. ChatGPT, for the most part, as far as I know, is free, which means that the problem may not only be that people are, I think the problem that I see is that people are seeking community and AI feels like the community. Disclosure, I've been in some groups for just for accountability and such. And when you ask a question, people will often redirect you back to AI. They are not wanting to be the community, and so people are finding the community within AI. And I'm just like, if I am experiencing this, then it is very likely that other people are experiencing that, because while I'm special, I'm not that special, which means that people are probably experiencing something similar, right? I'm thinking about the people who are using AI as a therapist. The barrier is how quickly they can get to a therapist and whether or not they can afford a therapist. But because we're not talking about the systems that make that into a problem, and I blame insurance, namely, and the constantly increasing cost of living that doesn't keep up, that where paychecks don't keep up with what it costs to actually have a life. I think that the problem that we are seeing is that life itself is behind a paywall and people are trying to access life by any means necessary. And one of those means has become AI. And so I think about it from a therapeutic perspective, right? Like, I would think about the kid who is misbehaving in a family system, right? The child is, they're cussing out teachers, and they never clean anything, and they're a hard person to be around as a child. It is easy to say that the child is the problem. And what the child is doing is a problem. And there is a system behind it that has supported this child becoming the way that this child is. And what are we doing to correct the system while we're trying to reprimand the child? I'm not saying don't reprimand the child, don't correct the child, don't redirect the child, don't teach the child. I'm also saying, though, that if the system doesn't change, it's going to produce similar behaviors. So if we're saying that we want to see people use generative AI less, what is going on in the system that we need to be addressing so that we can distance people's use of this thing? And I believe that part of the problem is the system of capitalism, right? I think that it's capitalism, it's time impoverishment, it's the fact that the greedy will never be satisfied. They constantly are looking for more. This is hoarding with money and with information for the sake of money. Like, you don't need $1 billion. And yet they have $1 billion and are dissatisfied and want more. There is something missing within, right? They don't know who they are without money, and they're competing for more money, but they don't even know why. And I think that we are having conversations on the individual level about what the individual is doing, and we should, but we should also, with the same or similar verve, be talking about the systems that are in place. And I think that some of us we may also need to do additional work, myself included, in separating how we feel about how we feel about people's use of AI and what we see as the potential long-term consequences for the individual and the community in using AI, and also address that These people with their so-called infinite wisdom haven't figured out another way to cool their systems that doesn't require our fresh drinking water and that does not pollute our air. Because for me, there there is another way, but because they are trying to hoard dollars and be fast, they are not using their imaginations and technology to figure out another way, because this one simply is cheaper and it has the most financial return, right? It's, to me, it's the equivalent when people say like you shouldn't be eating meat because methane and da 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 da. I'm looking like the problem is not that people eat meat. The problem is how the meat is harvested, how the animals are treated prior to the harvesting. And if we can address the system of people trying to create shortcuts in farming, we can create solutions that don't require people to give up what they eat, right? And quite frankly, low key, high key, eating all of your vegetables doesn't make it better for the environment either, right? There's still consequences somewhere. Even if you're kicking the can down the road, the fact is that someone has to deal with the damn can. So I think that we are, in some ways, I guess we're kicking the can down the road. And I want to see us actually pick up the can. We are blaming the individual. And I'm not saying that the individual does not have accountability here, because what role are you playing in the problem? And who is responsible for this problem? I think that is the other part of the question that is not being addressed in a large enough way, right? Not, and I recognize also that my algorithms may not algorithm properly to show me that there are people who are talking about and addressing our politicians who are getting into bed with corporations who want nothing more than to make more money by any means necessary. All this to say that we are all accountable for an outcome, which means no, we should not have frivolous use of AI. And there is someone who is responsible for the creation of this in the first place. And we definitely need to also be addressing them, and maybe even addressing them louder. And maybe instead of saying get rid of all AI, because AI is pretty innocuous and in a lot of spaces. And if we see it as maybe a net neutral as opposed to a net gain or a net loss, if we see it as a neutral, maybe we would be more invested in how can you have your AI and not kill us? And maybe that's where the conversation starts. Anyway, thank you for joining me for what is essentially a brain dump, for our Critical Thinking Thursday. And I kind of just wanted to sit in the feels of it all, right? Like, let me know how you feel about what was said, and let me also know what you are thinking. And this is going to be my moment to remind you that I like discourse, not disrespect. Keep it respectful. Discourse means you're allowed to disagree. You're allowed to bring your different point of view, your opinion. You can share with me your journal articles, share the links, all those things. Please do. And keep it respectful means we're not name calling. We're not, this is not a practice in degradation. Don't get your dopamine hits off being a jackass, right? I think there are ways to have a conversation that can lead to something. And it's kind of hard to do that when someone is fighting for their lives in the comments because people are just being mean. So if you are feeling particularly unkind today, go put it in your journal. Don't put it in my comment section. All right. I will see you tomorrow for another one of our Daily Donna conversations. All right. You're the bee's knees. Bye.